My name is Mike By. I'm an alcoholic. Through the grace of God and His gift to me, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, lovingly and caringly delivered to me by people like you in rooms like this, I've now found it necessary or desirable to take a drink or a substitute drug since October 7th, 1985, and for that I'm eternally and profoundly grateful. I'm a proud member of the Myrtle Beach 12 and 12 group. Strangely enough, we meet in Myrtle Beach. Who'd have thought that? And we meet at the Delano Club, and we meet on Mondays at 5:30 and Saturdays at 10. We have a women's meeting Thursday at 6 o'clock at the club, and we have a men's meeting at 6 o'clock on Tuesday at the Senior Citizen Center. So if you find yourself in Myrtle Beach, and on any of those days, and you're the right gender, we invite you to come and share your experience, strength, and hope with us, because God knows we need it. I have a sponsor, he has a sponsor, he has a sponsor. I tell you that because, for two reasons. First of all, I tell you that because I want you all to know that this time around I'm doing it your way. I am not a one-chip wonder. I first arrived at Alcoholics Anonymous, it was first suggested, you know how they suggest, that you go to Alcoholics Anonymous by a person who had some authority over me in 1968. That didn't go very well. I was a student at Union Theological Seminary, and there were a whole bunch of drunks in my room the night before, and I needed to get some sleep, so I took my tighty whities and my pillow, and I went over and slept in the doorway of the chapel. Unfortunately, I didn't come to in time. And as chapel started that morning, there was this half-naked drunk in the doorway. And the dean suggested later that day that I might want to go to AA, because it seemed that I drank more than the other seminarians, and I drank more often than the other seminarians, and when I drank more and more often than the other seminarians, I acted considerably more bizarrely than the other seminarians. And he suggested I go to AA, and I don't know I looked around and found a meeting on the other side of town, lest I'd run into anybody who might think I was a drunk. And I got there, and y'all were very nice, and you greeted me warmly and asked what I was doing there. And see, I found this meeting. I stopped at the 7-Eleven and got a six-pack because it was a 3-beer drive there and a 3-beer drive back. And there are those drunks who calculate how long the trip is by how many beers it takes. And you asked me what I was doing there, and I told you that I was a student at Union Theological Seminary, and it was suggested that I come to an AA meeting in case I ever ran into anybody with a drinking problem in one of my parishes. I could tell them where to go. And strangely enough, on the way out of that meeting, a guy named John, who I met there, put his arm around me and said, "Mike, you know, we have a God-given program." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "We have 12 God-given steps that perform miracles in people's lives." And I said, "Yeah, I know that, John." And he said, "But we find they work a whole lot better if you don't drink." And so evidently my explanation didn't quite pass muster because I smelled like 3 beers on the way there. So I tell you, I have a sponsor. You know, I spent a long time sponsoring myself. The problem with that is that I kept waking up places drunk with my sponsor. My sponsor used to take me out and get me drunk all the time. It was awful. So this time I'm doing it your way. And the other reason I tell you I have a sponsor is that everything I'm going to say tonight I learned in this program. Everything I say I learned in this program. And mostly I learned from my sponsors. So if I say anything that offends you or upsets you, do not come up afterwards and start complaining to me. Just come up, I'll give you my sponsor's telephone number. You can call him and complain to him. He's heard it before. He's usually available at 2 a.m. No, he's not doing anything else. Let's get me drunk real fast. I'm supposed to tell you in a general way what it was like, what happened, what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like today. I'm not supposed to tell you what it was like. You know, I mean, people got to say, something what it's like and what happened, what it's like. It ain't the problem. I want it to be the problem. I got a whole bunch of it's that are the problem. And when I got here, I had an even bigger list. My job was the problem. My parents were a problem. My sisters were the problem. My boss was the problem. The people in my parish were a problem. My wife was a problem. My kids were a problem. Everything was a problem. I was the problem. My friend has a little sign underneath his mirror in his bathroom that says, "You are looking at the problem. For the answer, look up." What I was like was that I grew up in an intensely Irish, intensely Southern, intensely alcoholic family. Everybody in my family is a drunk. Grandparents, parents, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, that's a lie. I have two cousins who are not alcoholic, but we made them merry drunk so they would fit in a family reunion. We would get together frequently, and strong drink would be taken, harsh words would be exchanged, punches would be thrown, valuable antiques would be smashed, and then we'd all cry, hug each other, and talk about how much we loved each other, how wonderful it was to be family. Now, proof I'm an alcoholic is at 8 years old, my fondest ambition in life was to get old enough to get drunk, cuss somebody out, smack them upside the head, break something they cared about, and hug them and tell them I loved them. I wanted to be part of the fun. The first time I got married, we had the nice, polite reception at the country club, and then we went back to my parents' house and got down to some serious drinking. And my first wife, Keith Stugman, she wasn't an alcoholic, God help her. And she kept tugging and saying, "Come on, we got to go on our honeymoon, we got to leave." And I kept saying, "We can't leave, we haven't had the fight yet." Well, she finally made me leave. And we came back after a 1-week honeymoon, and I got back home and everybody said, "Oh, you left too early, you should have seen the fight, it was great." And I turned to my wife and said, "See, I told you." I loved my family, and they adored me. We're an Irish family. I am the youngest child. I am the only male of my father. I have one male cousin, and his last name isn't By. I was known the whole time growing up as the boy. I don't know what Kenny was, but he wasn't the boy. I would go to visit aunts, and they'd say, "Oh, Buster and Grace and the boy are here." My sisters were there, but they could care less about them. And if you grow up in a Southern Irish family, and you're a cute little red-headed boy with freckles and sparkling blue eyes and a mouthful of blarney, it's like being Jesus. It really is. It's just great. And they adored me. I grew up like a little Prince of Connemara. They showered me with affection and affirmation and love and attention, and my ego needed every piece of it. The problem was I grew up terrified. I was scared to death. Now, I know what I was scared of for a long time until I got to this program. And finally, through the grace of this program and the help of some sponsors, I figured out that what I was afraid of then, and I still grapple with today, is that you won't think that I'm as good as I want you to think I am. And so as a consequence, I developed this kind of shucking, jiving, sneaking around the corners, pretending to be kind of thing. And I did it my whole life, and I lived in terror you were going to find out. I did pretty well in school, but I was sure that that was a mistake. I was a reasonably decent athlete, but I was positive that you all were going to find out that I was going to screw up. And as the minute that happened, I wasn't going to be the little prince anymore, and I wasn't going to be the boy, and I wasn't going to have all that affirmation and love and attention, which I so desperately needed. And so I grew up developing a trait that every alcoholic I know has. We can walk into a room anywhere, anytime, and in 5 minutes we can tell you exactly what people want out of us, and we give it right back to them. It's kind of like my friend Sean says, it's like walking around with a mirror in front of your face. Just reflect back what you get. That's okay, wins you lots of friends and those kind of things. Ever seen the back of a mirror? It's nothing but black. And that's what was going on inside of me. I was absolutely terrified from the time I got up until the time I went to bed. And I was always figuring out how do I shoot an angle? How do I shuck? How do I con? How do I jive? How do I get people to like me? That went on until I was 13 years old. And I found a cure for that at 13. It happened in the bark shed outside a house in Whitmire, South Carolina, where my great uncle and his wife and 6 of her sisters lived together. No wonder he drank. 7 old ladies and poor Uncle Watts. And after Sunday supper, Uncle Watts stood up, as he always did, looked at my daddy and said, "It's time to go for a walk." Now, my aunts are good Christian ladies. And they all tisked. But as my daddy rose, he said, "It's time for the boy," that'd be me, "to go along." And everybody sort of kind of pulled their back, and my daddy kind of shrugged and said, "Come on." And off we went on our walk, and we walked 25 feet out the back of that house and turned left into a bark shed. And I thought that was an awful short walk, but I wasn't going to say anything. And my great uncle, we sat down on some crates, and my great uncle reached out down behind one crate, and he pulled out a bottle of clear white liquid. And he took the top off of it, and he took a swallow, and he went, and he said something real smart. And he said a couple of things real smart. And then he finally gave it to my daddy, and my daddy took a swallow of it, and he went, and he said something real smart. Now, being the chameleon I am, I knew immediately what the deal was here. You take this bottle, whatever is in it, you take a swallow of it, and you and you say something real smart. So I was working on my smart thing to say, the way we all do. You know, you had it in mind, you practice it 3 or 4. Yeah, that sounds great. So I got my smart thing in my head, and they hand me the bottle, and I turn it up, and I put it down, and I try with everything I got to go, and say my smart thing. And it came out something like, Seems that what was in that bottle was crick liquor that white liquor that my great uncle had made all by himself out in the woods. And I coughed and sputtered and gave the bottle back to my great uncle. And I sat there and I made 2 decisions. And the first decision, nothing happened really. You know, I am not an instant alcoholic. You know, I'm a type B. You know, I had a period of social drinking before I became alcoholic. And I gave it back to him, and I made 2 decisions. One, I was never, ever, 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 ever going to drink any of that stuff ever again. Obviously, I changed my mind later. And I decided that my great uncle and my father had figured out I did not have what it takes to be the little Prince of Connemara, and they were going to kill me by poisoning me and bury me in the woods outside the bark shed in Whitmire, South Carolina. And when somebody asked, they just go, "Well, no, he wandered off. We gave him a drink of liquor, and he just wandered." One thing did happen. And I use this, I use it all the time. It works for the guys. I don't know if it works for the girls. But it works for the guys. I got a little tickle down in my tummy. And it's a lot like the first time you ever kissed a girl. Remember that? You have no idea what you did. You have no idea if you did it right, but you can't wait to do it again and see what happens next. And the bottle got back to me, and I poured as much as I could down my throat. Changed my mind about not drinking. Handed it back to my great uncle, and I waited. And that's where my social drinking ended. I had a 10-minute period of social drinking. Closest I've come to a social drink since that day is that somebody says, "I think I'll have a drink," and I say, "So shall I." It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. The skies opened. The stars shone bright, the trumpets sounded, the angels sang, and for the first time in 13 years, I was not afraid. I was just fine. I was a man among men. I was the little Prince of Connemara, and I looked over at the king and thought to myself, if you don't retire soon, I might just stage a coup, because I'm ready to take over. It was amazing. My friend Cliff says that any good alcoholic, after 10 minutes of drinking, gets 8 minutes of okay. And I got my 8 minutes of okay. I describe it like that feeling that we all get. You go, oh, I got this. And that's what happened. My father was a terrible alcoholic. And I can remember seeing him go to AA and staying sober for a period of time. And then walking in one day, and he had a beer in front of him. And I knew that he knew how this was going to end, because it ended the same way every time. You know, he'd drink a little bit, and then he'd drink a little bit more, and then he'd drink a little bit more, and then he'd go on a 3-day bender, and all hell would break loose, and he'd come back, and he'd apologize to everybody, and you look his eyes, you see that incomprehensible demoralization our book talks about, and he'd say, I'm going back to AA, it'll be okay. And 2 months later, you're walking, he's drinking a beer. And I can remember as a small child thinking, this is not a dumb man. Why is he doing this? And that day I found out. I never again questioned why he drank. Never again. It was magical. I didn't drink again for about 6 months. Couldn't get any. And my folks went out of town. My sisters, who are both older than me, had a party. And I was a little brat, and if I didn't get to come to the party, I was going to rat them out. And so they had a party, and they were 6 and 7 years older than I was. So they were 20 and 21, and they had all the cool guys come to the party, and driving the Corvair convertibles and that kind of stuff. For those, you know, how old I am. And they had all those women with the bumps in the right places, and I needed to get okay, and I did. And I impressed all the guys with my knowledge on a vast array of many varied subjects. And I charmed all the women with my clever repartee, and then I vomited all over everybody. I decided I needed some air, so I went outside. I took my daddy's brand new, and I mean 3-day-old Gran Turismo Hoke automobile that he loved more than anything in the world, including the little Prince of Connemara. And 14 years old, drunk, I drove it around the neighborhood with the utmost of caution and carefully parked it in the creek in front of our house. I went upstairs, I passed out. I got up the next morning, I came downstairs. I wasn't feeling too good, but I said to my sisters, when are we going to have another party? And my oldest sister looked at me and said, if we have anything to do about it, you'll never have another party as long as you live. And that might not be very long. And my younger sister looked at me and said, when you drink, you're worse than Daddy. And you had to go some to be worse than Daddy. It was predictive of what would happen. Next 25 years, rampant alcoholism. Every chance I had, I drank to excess every chance I had. Drank when I shouldn't have, drank when I knew I shouldn't have, drank when I didn't want to. I'm a traveling drunk and a blackout drunk. That's a bad combination. Those of you who know, you wake up somewhere and the first 3 questions are, who are you, where are we, and what are we doing here? You know, I've woken up in beds and felt a body next to mine and said that prayer. Please, God, I don't care how old, how ugly, just please, God, make it a woman. Y'all laugh, but, we get to drink and all bets are off, He's always answered that positively. God answers prayers, I'll tell you that. That went on for a long time. First came in 1968. And for the next 17 years, I bounced in and out, and in and out, and in and out. I came in here and I stole white chips from you, and I used them as get-out-of-jail-free cards. I'd get into trouble with the family or with the boss or the bishop or the parish or something, and I'd go get a white chip, and I have a white chip, it's okay. And I did that once. My uncle, my Uncle Joe, who had 7 years in this program and then drank and then got 17 and died, was a mainstay of Alcoholics Anonymous in Pennsylvania where he lived. I did that to him once. We were together and I said, oh, Uncle Joe, I have a white chip. And he just ignored me. I mean, he was talking to my father. He just kept right on talking. I got a white chip. And I said, no, I have a white chip. And I said, Uncle Joe, I have a white chip. He said, oh, if you wanted a white chip, your dad's got like 70 of them up in his drawer, for God's sakes. Anybody can get a white chip. I said, well, he said, come back and talk to me in 3 months and tell me what you're doing and who your sponsor is. Because he knew what I was doing. On October 7, 1985, I was invited into the office of the Bishop of the Diocese of Maryland, where I happened to have a parish down around Annapolis. It was 9 o'clock Monday morning. I was supposed to be there. I wasn't happy about it. But I went in. I knew there were only 2 reasons that they could be inviting me there. And one was that they wanted to congratulate me on the excellent job that I was doing in this dumpy little parish down on the Chesapeake Bay. And the other was that there was some thorny theological problem threatening Western civilization that only a brilliant mind like mine could help them solve. There was a third possibility I hadn't even counted on. And when I walked in, I immediately knew what was happening. I knew I was about to be the recipient of an intervention. And I knew that because 2 of the 3 Johnson Institute certified alcohol interventionists in the Diocese of Maryland were sitting there. And I knew they were 2 of the 3 Johnson Institute certified alcohol interventionists because I was the 3rd Johnson Institute certified alcohol interventionist in the Diocese of Maryland. There are lots of people out there who owe their sobriety to me being drunk, by God. Now, I have been through 50 of these. I know what's going on. I know the minute I clear that door, there is a bed at the drunk farm, and I am going to be in it. I'll tell you the kind of drunk I am. I decided to negotiate. I said, well, if you think I'm drinking too much, I guess I could cut back. One of the interventionists, a guy named Ron, laughs hard, he almost wet himself. I said, well, I guess I could quit if you really need me to. And they both shook their heads. And he said, well, I guess I could go back to A&A, like the worst thing in the world. And they both shook their head. And finally the bishop interrupted, and he looked at me and he said, here's your choices. He said, leave the keys to your house, the keys to your car, the keys to the church, your credit cards, your checkbook, and your collar on my desk. Walk out of here and don't ever come back. Or you can go to rehab, get sober, stay sober, go to meetings, get a sponsor, work steps. And I thought about it for a while. I had to weigh those options. You know. And I'll tell you why I went. Now, I've been around AA for a bunch. And I had $1.25 in my pocket. And I had my last drink at 7:15 that morning. If you're the kind of drunk I am, and you had a drink at 7:15, it's now getting close to 11 o'clock, you got that feeling down in your tummy that you are about to turn into a human vibrator. And you need a drink. And $1.25 was not going to get me enough to drink. And I knew that there's a time-honored tradition in this program. You take somebody off to the drunk farm, you got to stop and get them a last drink. And so I basically went to rehab in order to get a drink. He stopped and he gave, I got a half a pint of scotch and a couple of beers, and we got to the rehab, and I was okay. I was just fine, and I knew that these were intelligent and well-educated people, and they were professionals in the field, and after 3 days there, they would would understand that these other people were well-meaning but terribly misinformed, and they would let me go home. 36 days later, in a 28-day program, I was allowed to leave. I don't know what was different from that rehab and the other ones, and the nut huts, and all the other places that I got to go because of my alcoholism. But I knew the one thing that happened was that while I was there, some of the old-timers in Annapolis, in Alcoholics Anonymous, got together, several of whom were members of my parish. And the topic of conversation that night after the meeting at McDonald's drinking coffee was, what are we going to do with the drunk priest? And the answer they came up with was they found the meanest, nastiest, ugliest human being in Alcoholics Anonymous in Annapolis, Maryland, and forced him to be my sponsor. I don't know who they were punishing, but they got both of us. His name was Bob T. He called me while I was there, or I called him. I had to call him. I was forced to call him. He was not impressed. I will tell you that. I mean, I called up. I said, "Hello, this is Father Michael Bye." And his response was, "Huh?" I said, "This is Father Michael Bye, Bar Stonebreaker, Doc Ridley, and Sonny Nicewiner told me I was to call you." "What?" I said, "This Mike Bye and Boris and Doc and Sonny told me to call you something about sponsorship." And his response was, "Are you that damn drunk priest they stuck me with?" He didn't understand that he was about to sponsor his future spiritual giant in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's Matthew, thanks for the introduction, but you forgot to mention how humble I was. It's really important that people notice how humble you are. Because you ever been humble and nobody notices? It's really a drag. You all notice how humble I am. Anyway, they got together, and he suggested that I would get out Thursday, and he would pick me up at 7 o'clock to go to the Birdsville meeting, which was 5 minutes from my house and started at 8:30. And I tried to point out to him that it was 5 minutes from my house, and he said, "Yeah, I know," and he hung up. And that Thursday evening, there was a knock on my door, and I opened it, and there stood my new sponsor. Now, I understand something about sponsorship, and I understand to have a good sponsor-pigeon relationship in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, you have to have somebody of similar tastes and background and education, somebody you can relate to on a variety of levels. Now, I know I don't look like much now, but when I got here, I was something, by God. I got degrees from a number of prestigious universities, ones you all know. You know, I've done postdoctoral work in Europe. I've testified before both houses of Congress. I've had an article done on the front page of the religion section of the Washington Post newspaper above the fold as the hip young priest in D.C. I'm somebody, by God. My sponsor, Bob T., stood 5'6" tall. He weighed 220 pounds. There was not an ounce of fat on him. He was a fireman. He carried hoses. He had biceps the size of my thighs. He dropped out of high school in the 11th grade. He had bad dental work, slick back hair, and tattoos head to foot. And in 1985, I didn't do tattoos. He looked at me, and he said, "Get in the car." I said, "Don't you want to talk to the family?" He said, "I'll talk to them when you're not around. Get in the car." Now, I'm a man of some stature in the community. I'm the local Episcopal priest. I have a certain standard to maintain. I drive a nice vehicle. In my driveway was a 1967, this is 1985, 1967 blue, well, mostly Bondo color, but some blue, Mercury automobile. So I go out and I try to get in the car, and I get to the passenger side, and it doesn't work. Any decent human being would just slide in the driver's side, not my sponsor. He came in through the window, like some damn Beatles song, for God's sakes. I got in the car, he started, he backed out of my driveway, and I found out the most interesting feature of my sponsor's vehicle was that the passenger seat was not attached to the body of the car. So he went backward, I went forward, he went forward, I went backward. I have not had a drink for 36 days. I'm going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in a death trap of an automobile with a guy with tattoos. I am not happy. I did not arrive here and say, "Oh, thank God I'm home." I arrived here and said, "Thank God we didn't die on the way." We got to the meeting at 7:05, just like I said we would. We beat the coffee makers there, for God's sakes. We sat there in the dark, and we talked. Well, he talked, I tried to talk, he could care less what I had to say. I finally said, "You know, Bob, I'm doing my fifth step now." He said, "Not anymore." I said, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "Not anymore." I said, "Well, what am I doing?" He said, "You're doing step 1A. I'm your sponsor." I said, "1A, powerlessness?" He said, "No, dummy. He used the word, he called me dummy all the time to protect my anonymity, so nobody would know who I was. And he said, no, dummy. Step 1A is what comes before step 1. I said, well, what's step 1A? He said, get in the car. I worked that for 3 months, every night, get in the car, go to some dumb meeting, sit out, get there an hour and a half before, sit out there listening, run his mouth. Coffee makers got there, we got out, we helped them set up, we went outside, smoked cigarettes, talked to the guys. I tried to talk, they could care less what I had to say. We started in the meeting, grabbed me by the arm. He said, if anybody accidentally calls on you in there, you tell them who you are and what you are and you need to listen. I said, I don't understand. He said, you say who you are, your Mike, and what you are as an alcoholic, and then you say, I need to listen. I said, you want me to pass? He says, you never pass in AA. Say, I need to listen. I said, why would I say that? He said, because you need to listen, stupid. Walked in, sat down, him on one side. Some guy was about 8'6" and had a fresh knife scar across his face in case I decided to run my mouth. Wasn't allowed to speak. I wasn't allowed to speak for 10 months. My name's Mike Bye, I'm an alcoholic and I need to listen. I tried once. We were doing the 5th step. We went to a step meeting on Wednesday night. We were doing the 5th step, and I knew that because we'd done the 4th step the week before, and we were doing the 6th step the week after, and I have all these degrees beyond my name, so I knew we were doing 5. And I spent the whole week studying 5. I read everything. I even read St. Augustine's Preparation for Confession, which is a real page turner, I'll tell you that. It got around to me, and I said, my name's Mike Bye, and I'm an alcoholic. As many of you know, I was going to say priest, and I got out. And from across the table came the melodious voice of my sponsor, that's a lie, shut up! And I slid down and tried to hide in the shag carpet, and on the way down I said, and I need to listen. Yeah, that's what they did too. We tell you we don't laugh at the newcomer. We might not laugh at him, but we laugh real near him, I'll tell you that much. He made me do terrible things. We got out of that meeting, we got in the car. He pulled out of the parking lot, I flew into the back seat. We got to my street where he took a left, and he went, zoom, right past the Bob, I think you've missed the turn. No, we're going to Denny's. Denny's. I am personally acquainted with the head chef at Le Leon d'Or 5-star restaurant in the Washington Watergate Hotel. I can walk in there anytime and get a table. I don't do Denny's. I certainly don't do Denny's with 4 other guys with tattoos sitting in the corner booth with all the windows in case anybody walks past and sees me there. We left at 11 o'clock. And that's the way it was for the next 6 months. Get in the car, go to the meeting, go to Denny's, go home at 11. 4 months into it, we left Denny's early one night. I don't know why. And as we were pulling in and making the turn, going to my house, the guy at the liquor store was turning off the light in the liquor store. And I had thought, for the last 3 months, 4 months, doesn't this guy have somewhere else to be on some night? I knew he had a family. Doesn't he need to be home with them sometimes? And then I thought, well, if you were his family, you wouldn't want him around either. So I figured I was doing service work for Al and I. He's turned off the light, and I knew why we went to Denny's and why we left at 11. And I turned to him and I gave him that look that every pigeon has given their sponsor. I know what you're doing. And he turned back and gave me that loving sponsor look. And he said, that's okay, Mike. I don't like you either. And he didn't, because I was unlikable. But he loved me enough to love a drunk. And he drugged me to this program. And he made me pretend to do steps. He made me write stuff down on pieces of paper, and it was all a lie. Because I was doing what I always did. I was shucking and jiving, trying to get through this and figure out how I could drink without getting caught and without suffering the consequences. But God knows he stuck with it. 6 months sober, he said, I'm not going to pick you up tomorrow night. And I went, oh, thank you, Jesus, God, I get a night off. And he said, you're going to pick up so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. I said, I don't like them. He said, I didn't ask you if you liked them. You're going to give them a ride to a meeting. I said, one guy doesn't bathe. He doesn't smell good. He said, I didn't ask how he smelled. I told you to give him a ride to a meeting, dummy. So I gave them a ride to a meeting. And I pretended. I hated you all. I hated this program. I hated every one of you. I hated laughing. Matt talked about humor and laughing. And there wasn't anything funny in my life. And I hated it when you laughed. And somebody would say something to me, Alcoholics Anonymous, and, in my head, the people who live up there are going, yeah, it makes sense to me. And everybody else laughs hysterically. So I take a note, don't ever say that. And you got the damn slogans. My God, in heaven above. It's like you died and went to Hallmark. Can't you people get anything with a little more intellectual weight for a theological genius like myself? And I did that for 10 months. I go to AA meetings, and they say, how's it going? I say, oh, going great. I love it. Playing the chameleon, giving you back what you want. Wonderful way of life, great steps. Just introduced me to a whole new world of spirituality. It's just wonderful. I go home and drop kick the dog across the living room rug, chase my children with bats and knives because I didn't like the way they said thank you. I was insane. I was lethal. I should have been locked up. I rearranged walls and furniture because somebody said good morning and I didn't think they meant it. It was awful. My family, God bless them, endured a long time with me drunk. That wasn't anything compared to me sober. You see, my problem was never alcohol. Other people had problems. You said, if you have a problem with alcohol, I didn't have any problem with alcohol. It gave me that, 3 months before I quit drinking. I was sitting in my basement. I'd come home from day at work. Bad day. I hadn't been able to drink as much as I wanted to. Poured myself up. Went and got my glass. We all have our glass. It's a big glass. Poured it full of gin, put about that much tonic and a little squeeze of lime, a couple ice cubes in it. Then went down and sat in my chair. We all have our chair. It's kind of like the neurotic spaceship. You can take a trip and never leave the farm. And the glass is sweating because it's summer. And I took a long draw of that gin. And I held the glass up to the sky and I said the most honest prayer I've ever said in my life. I said, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God, for making this so I can deal with that. My entire drinking career has been trying to walk the razor edge between knee crawling, tree hugging, throw up, roll in it drunk, and stark raving sober. And I never fell off on the stark raving sober side if I could help it. So here I am messing around, pretending, and I'm 10 months sober, and I go to Bob. Now, if you're here just to get court slip signed or stay out of jail or get the family off your back or let your boss keep your job, but you're just kind of messing around here, I will tell you, don't ever, 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 ever do this because it's a terrible mistake for people like you. 10 months sober, at the Arnold Saturday morning meeting, I told my sponsor the truth, which was I was gone crazy. I hadn't had a drink in 10 months. I didn't have a program. I was going to either drink, kill myself, or kill a large number of other people. I liked option 3 best. And he looked at me in his sage wisdom, said, well, I guess life will just unfold as it unfolds. And I snapped, and I was scared to death of this man because he threatened a bodily injury a lot. Don't do it, I'm going to break your damn kneecaps. Okay, Bob. But I snapped, and I grabbed him by the shirt, and I said, you don't seem to understand. I'm going to kill somebody, and you just moved to the top of the list. Not that he had very far to go to get there. And he said, well, what do you want out of me? And I said, you're so damn smart. What am I supposed to do about that? And he said, why don't you join AA? I said, what do you think I've been doing for the last 10 months? And he said, visiting. I wish I could tell you I joined AA that day. But I waited 3 months. And with 1 month and 1 year without alcohol, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up. I was crying. I was in the most emotional pain I've ever been in my life, and I had absolutely no idea why. And I rolled over out of my bed. I got down on my knees. I looked up at the ceiling, and I said, "Dear God, please help me." And for the first time, and I'm 13 years ordained as a priest at that time, the first time in my life I heard the voice of God. And very clearly I heard, "Why don't you join AA?" Who knew God sounded like Bob or Bob sounded like God? It was a revelation to me. I went down and I picked up the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I read it, and I put me in those pages for the first time. See, all the time before, I was taking the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was fitting it into my life. And those parts that didn't fit, I trimmed off. All of a sudden now I was going to take my life and fit it into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and those parts that don't fit have to get trimmed off. 2 weeks later, Bob came to me and said, "You got to find a new sponsor." I said, "Oh, really? Why?" He said, "I'm going to Florida for 4 months." I said, "Oh, well, Bob, that's okay. We can just do it on the telephone." And he said, "No, you got to get a sponsor who gets his eyes on you at least 4 times a week to see how bad you're lying. And I'm not going to be around. You have to find a new guy." I said, "Well, Bob, that really disappoints me." And inside I was going, "Thank you, Jesus, God, I've been delivered from this man." He gave me 3 names. And one of them was this real laid-back California drunk. You know how California drunks are? You know, they're all spiritual and laid back, and they laugh at everything in the meetings, and, you know, everything's kind of smooth and cool and all that. So I went to Bill and I said, "Bob said that I could ask you to be my sponsor. Would you do it?" And he'd say, "Well," and he looked at me and said, "Well, dummy, we'll give it a try." And turned into Bob Jr. just like that. Now, he was funny in the meetings and laid back, and then we'd get somewhere and he'd start yelling at me. And he took me through the steps one more time. I said, "Well, I'm working on my 7th step." "Not anymore." I said, don't tell me to get in the car. Please don't tell me to get in the car." He said, "We're going to work on one." And he took me through the steps. We got to step 1, and he told me, see, I suffer from a disease of perception. And my mind's like this, and the world's like this. And I experience what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, which means that I'm pissed off all the time because things don't match what I want them to. So next time you're pissed off, just say, "I have cognitive dissonance." He said, when you drink, you take the world and go, and it matches, and you're happy. He said, what we're going to do is we're going to leave the world alone. We're going to take your mind and go, and it'll match. And that works pretty good, except my mind's like a rubber band. Every time you let go, it goes boing. I have to go to another meeting and work another step and talk to my sponsor because I constantly have to readjust my perception. He took me through the 2nd step. I mean, I have a degree in God. I work for God, for heaven's sake. What I found out was I knew a lot about God. I didn't have a relationship with a God that was worth a flip. I didn't have a God I could depend on. I could tell you about him, but I would never trust him. Number 3, he told me, I was going to make a decision to turn my will and my life over to care of God. I spent a long time on 3 that first 10 months. See, because I'd read ahead and I knew 4 was coming. So I'd say, well, I haven't turned my will and my life over completely to God, so I can't do 4. And I could have kept that going for like 8 years, man. And he said, all you did was make a decision. He said the way drunks turn their will and their life over to the care of God is steps 4 through 12. He said other people, normal people, go to build grand crusades and get saved, or they go to church, or they have some spiritual experience on a mountaintop somewhere or something. Drunks do 4 through 12. That's how we turn our lives over to God. I also point out that we keep doing those because we keep having to turn our lives over to God. And 4, I made a list of all those supposed character defects I had. He told me, a friend of mine, somebody told me that I had no character and a lot of defect. I was going to use the little assets that Hazelton says to put down. He told me the fact I thought I had any assets was a character defect. And then I sat down and told a plumber what I wouldn't tell a $200 an hour psychiatrist. I got to 6, and got entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. That's a lie. We don't want God to remove them all. At least I don't. I can't speak for you, but I don't. I want them out of the way. You know that shelf in your mother's house? That closet? Got that shelf way up there? Where she puts that stuff that she might need someday, but she doesn't want anybody to know she has? That's where I want my character defects out of the way, not embarrassing me. But if I need them, I know where to get them. Suppose I'm driving down the road in Myrtle Beach and some guy from Ohio cuts me off. And I go for my anger, and God's taking it away. I mean, what am I supposed to do? Just let him go and say, have a nice day. What kind of stuff is that? I'm going to ask God to remove them. He used that loophole that in that prayer, take away all the character defects that stand in the way of my service to you and my fellows. Obviously, I have some defects that are very much in service of God and my fellows. I don't understand how. My sponsor said, well, some days you serve as an example, some days you serve as a warning. That's how my character defect helps other people. I made a list of all the people who I did anything wrong to, even though they deserved twice as much as I gave them. And then I tried to go and, make amends to them, God. And I continue to do that process and try to keep an eye on my behavior. I pray every day. Some days it's really great. Some days I'm sitting there saying, why in God's name am I doing this? I got things I got to do. But I sit there quietly and I read stuff. When my mind goes to what I'm supposed to pick up at the grocery store, I go back and read it again and again and again and again and again. And finally the 15 minutes are up and I can go do what I need to do. And some days I sit there and the presence of God is right there. And it's amazing. And as a result of that, I've had a spiritual awakening, and I'm a humble spiritual giant. And I get a whole lot of those little blue chips, and I try to carry the message, and I get to pick up people at 2 o'clock in the morning and drive them to detox while they puke all over my car. Ain't it wonderful? But what's happened is that I've gotten a whole new life. Most amazing things have happened to me in this program. Amazing things. My family's been restored to me. I don't know why. But they have. I found a God in my understanding. I've been restored to a position of respect in my profession. Today, when the bishop calls me into the office, it's not to bitch about something stupid I did while I was drunk. Most of the time, it's they come in and say, what are we going to do with this drunk priest? My answer is, let's just shoot him. It'll be easier for him. Easier for him, for us, everything. Just kill him. Take him out in the field, blow his brains out. Just be easier. But two things have happened. I'm positive all my life that I have been searching for God. I think that's why I became a priest. A friend of mine says that he started looking for God in the bottom of a glass. At the end he couldn't find him in the bottom of the bottle. I've always wanted to know what God's will is so I could do it, I wish he'd just leave a note on the refrigerator like everybody else does, for God's sake. Pick up milk and bread. I found God in this program. I've heard the voice of God clearly in this program. I have. Some days it sounds like Steve, and some days it sounds like Paige, and some days it sounds like Kelly. Am I supposed to go on for 2 more hours, Kelly? She told me to ask her any question I need to. Some days it sounds like Kelly, and some days it sounds like Wallace. But it's the voice of God speaking to me. If you want to hear the voice of God, go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. God's an alcoholic. I know that. I've heard him speak at closed meetings, and we only let drunks in there. And it sounds like other people's voices, but it's the voice of God. If you have any problem in your life, you want to know what God thinks, go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and listen very carefully to everybody who speaks. If your God's like my God, pay particular attention to the people you hate in the womb. You know, the ones who you know are never going to get sober. You think, oh, God, are they here? And they're going to say that nonsense again. Those are the ones God always picks to deliver the message to me. Because then I have to go up afterwards and thank them and say, thank you for what he said. And then they think I like them and they hang around. It's just awful. The other great gift that I have received is the ability and the privilege of sitting in rooms like this with people like you. I cannot tell you how much that means. I spent my life alone as an alcoholic. And today I can come into rooms and sit with people like you in rooms like this. If you are here tonight and you have no other reason to stay sober so you can hang around with these people. These are the finest people you will ever meet in your life. These people will walk into the jaws of hell to save your life. They will give up their nights and their families for 4 months in a row so that a drunk like me doesn't get dropped off, double back to the liquor store and get drunk. They're incredible people in here. If you don't have any other reason not to drink, drink so you can hang out with them. 2 men drinking in a bar in Alaska. One was a very religious man, one was an atheist. Atheist said to the very religious man, I don't believe in your God. Very religious man said, why not? Atheist said, well, I gave your God a chance to prove himself. And he failed. Very religious man said, well, tell me about it. Atheist said, well, 3 months ago I was stuck 150 miles north of town in a blinding snow blizzard and I was lost and I knew if I didn't get help, I would die. And I knelt down in the snow and I looked up at the sky and I said, dear God, if you're there, please help me. A very religious man looked at the atheist and said, well, surely you must believe you're here. He said, no, some damned Eskimo came along and showed me the way back to town. 31 years ago, I was stuck 150 miles north of town in a blinding snow blizzard. And if I didn't get help, I would die. And God sent an Eskimo by the name of Bob Terry to show me the way back to town. If you have any problems in your life tonight, I pray to God that God will send you an Eskimo. He sent me an Eskimo many, many times in the last 31 years. Drag my butt back to town and sit it in a chair in Alcoholics Anonymous. If you have any problems, I pray to God he will send you an Eskimo. Look out for a guy who says, get in the car. I believe in the power of prayer. Tonight when I lay him down at my bedside, I will ask the God of my understanding if each and every one of you can have 24 more hours of this life. If you happen to have a God of your understanding, if you happen to be in communication with that God anytime in the near future, and if you happen to remember it, I would deeply, deeply appreciate it if you ask the God of your understanding if I can have 24 more hours of this life, because I absolutely love it. Thank you all very much for 12-stepping me one more time tonight.